Magic and Mystery in Tibet by Alexandra David-Neel. And this is a continuation of Chapter 5, which is called Disciples of Yore and Contemporary Emulators. According to the custom of Indian aesthetics, Naropa went on a begging round. Coming back to his master, he offered him the rice and curry, which he had received as alms. The rule is that a disciple eats only after his guru is satisfied, but far from leaving something for his follower. Tilopa ate up the whole contents of the bowl and even declared that the food was so much to his taste that he could have eaten another bowlful with pleasure. Without waiting for a more direct command, Naropa took the bowl and started again for the house where the generous householders bestowed such tasty alms. Unfortunately, when he arrived there, he found the door closed. Burning with zeal, the devoted disciple did not let himself be stopped for so little. He kicked the door open, discovered some rice and various stews, keeping warm on the stove in the kitchen, and helped himself to more of what Tilopa had enjoyed so much. The masters of the house came back as he was plunging a spoon into their pots and gave him a first-rate thrashing. Bruised from head to foot, Naropa returned to his guru, who showed no compassion whatever for his suffering. "What an adventure has befallen you on any account," he said, with a mocking calm. "You do not regret having become my disciple?" With all the strength that his pitiful condition left at his disposal, Naropa protested that far from regretting having followed such a guru, he deemed the privilege of being his disciple could never be paid for too dearly, even if one was to purchase it at the cost of one's life. Another day, Tilopa, passing by an open drain, asked the disciples who walked with him, "Which of you would drink of that drain water if I ordered him to?" It must be understood that it was not here only a question of overcoming natural disgust for the filthy liquid, but of being defiled according to the religious Hindu law. And here's a footnote that says, at that time, 10th century AD, Buddhism had already greatly degenerated, reverting to a number of Hindu superstitions strongly condemned by the Buddha. Nevertheless, while his companions hesitated, the Brahmin Naropa ran forward and drank the foul beverage. Another test was still more cruel. Master and disciple lived at the time in a hut near a forest. Once, returning from the village with Tilopa's meal, Naropa saw that during his absence the latter had fabricated a number of long wooden needles and hardened them in the fire. Greatly astonished, he inquired about the use Tilopa was meant to make of these implements. The yogin smiled strangely. "Could you," he asked, "bear some pain if it pleased me?" Naropa answered that he belonged entirely to him and that he could do whatever he liked with him. "Well," replied Tilopa, "stretch out your hand," and when Tilopa had obeyed, he thrust one of the needles under each of the nails of one hand and did the same to the other and finished with the toes. And then he pushed the poor tortured Naropa into the hut, commanded him to wait there until he returned, closed the door, and went away. Several days elapsed before he came back. He found Naropa seated on the ground, the needles still in his flesh. "What did you think while alone?" inquired Tilopa. "Have you not come to believe that I am a cruel master, and that you had better leave me?" "I have been thinking of the dreadful life of torments, which will be mine in the purgatories if I do not succeed, by your grace, in becoming enlightened in the mystic doctrine, and so escape a new rebirth," answered Naropa. As years went by, Naropa threw himself down from the roof of a house, crossed a blazing fire, and performed a number of quite fantastic feats, which often put his life in jeopardy. To conclude, I shall relate one more of these curious tests, the story being rather amusing. Master and disciple were strolling in the streets when they happened to meet a wedding procession, accompanying a bride to her husband's house. "I desire that woman," said Tilopa to Naropa. "Go, bring her to me." He had scarcely finished speaking before Naropa joined the cortege. Seeing that he was a Brahmin, the men of the wedding party allowed him to approach the bride, thinking that he meant to bless her. But when they saw that he took her in his arms and intended to carry her away, they seized on everything they could find to belabor poor Naropa. So soundly was he cudgeled that he fainted and was left for dead on the spot. Tilopa had not waited for the end of the performance to pass quietly on his way. When he came to his senses again, he had painfully dragged himself along until he overtook his whimsical guru. The latter, as welcome, asked him once more the usual question, "Do you not regret?" And, as usual, also, Naropa protested that 1,000 deaths seemed but a trifle to purchase the privilege of being his disciple. At last, Naropa got the reward of his long tribulations, but not in the form of regular teaching and initiation. If we trust the tradition, Tilopa seems to have used on that occasion a strange method somewhat akin to that patronized by the Chinese teachers of the Tsang sect. There is no doubt that though left apparently untaught, Naropa had been able to grasp a number of points in the short paths doctrine, and that's in quotation marks, short paths doctrine, during his lively period of probation. However, the manner of his full enlightening is related as follows. Naropa was seated near a fire in the open with his master. Quite unexpectedly, the latter took off one of his shoes and soundly slapped the disciple's face with it. Naropa saw all the stars of heaven, and at the same time the inner meaning of the short paths doctrine flashed into his mind. Naropa had, later on, a large number of disciples, and according to the tradition, was the most kind master, sparing his pupils the painful ordeals which he had himself so bitterly experienced. Already advanced in age, he left the monastery of which he was a reputed doctor, and, retiring in solitude, devoted 12 consecutive years to uninterrupted contemplation. He is said to have finally reached the excellent success, that is to say, Buddhahood. Naropa is especially known in Tibet as the spiritual teacher of the Lama Marpa, M-A-R-P-A, who was himself the master of the famous aesthetic poet Milarespa, whose religious songs are most popular all over Tibet. And I'm going to pause here, and I hope you enjoyed that. That was certainly interesting, and I must apologize for my voice. My voice is only now getting a little better where I can actually read a little bit, and I hope to conclude this chapter within a few days. So till then.